Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me on today. I'm really excited to share this topic. It's one that is multifaceted and it keeps growing in popularity. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of it today, but there's so much more information that has been growing out there about this topic of community food forests and of urban food forestry in general. When I started my dissertation research in 2013, there was very little available in the literature or research, and that's more and more is coming out. In a little while, I'll also discuss why I think urban food forestry and community food forests are two different terms. So I specifically looked at community food forests, and although I started the research in 2013, that was mostly doing online work and word of mouth, trying to locate where sites were and talk to site leaders. And then I was on the road from spring 2014 until fall 2015, visiting sites throughout the country and collecting information. With this map, I overlaid the sites I visited on a map of ecoregions to show that sites were located throughout the country in various growing conditions. And although the term food forest has been increasingly used to describe these sites, they do exist in areas where the forest ecosystem may not be the dominant ecosystem. And I'll talk more in a moment about the details of how we define that term. But generally speaking, I would like people to realize that it's a catchy term that quickly describes an ecologically designed food production system. An edible perennial polyculture may be more appropriate in some circumstances, but it's kind of a mouthful. Whereas food forest captures people's attention and imagination and can get them excited about a project. I visited about 30 projects altogether, but only around 24 were included in my research analysis. So again, this is over ecoregions, which are areas of general similarity in ecosystems, their type and quality. And here we have Atlantic Highlands, marine west coast forests, temperate prairies, southeastern plains, Appalachian forests. The sites were located, through a broad range of actual ecosystems. Okay. This is a map now of, in 2018, on my website I keep a map, and there's around 75 projects that I would consider urban food forestry. And this is basically to show that they're usually located in urbanized areas. And these types of sites can certainly exist in suburban or rural areas as well, but most of the ones are focused on really building community as well and providing access to land where people do not have a lot of access to land in order to grow. Another motivation is typically putting them in neighborhoods of diverse demographics in an effort to try and bring people together and build community. So a lot of the ones that I looked at were in urbanized areas. Our definition that we decided on for community food forests is a place where people come together to collaboratively grow food using an ecologically designed system based on structural and functional patterns found in forest ecosystems. And there's multiple ways that a community food forest could be described based on the three main words and how they interact with each other. Urban food forestry was first defined by Clark and Nicholas in 2013 in a journal article where they stated the intentional and strategic use of woody perennial food-producing species in urban edible landscapes to improve the sustainability and resilience of urban communities. So we see community food forests as slightly different because of that focus really on community. They're very social ecological systems, and there's the physical space of the actual food forest, but then there's also the community aspect, which is built to use the space, but also around the concept of what a food forest can provide in terms of environmental stewardship, food production, and really the link between those two is food and food systems and an understanding of food production. So one of my research questions was to really try to look at, in terms of physical structure and function, what do these sites look like? And the illustration that's at the bottom of this slide sort of illustrates the idea of the 7 different layers of a typical young woodland or forest, and that's the typical pattern used and replicated to grow in a community food forest. What that looks like on the ground is this photo here, which I took as a beacon food forest in Seattle. So you can kind of see the similarities where there's that middle main canopy tree species, and then other species underneath it as part of the subcanopy. My background, again, is in international agroforestry, but also permaculture. And internationally, these two sort of topics are blended more together, in my opinion, and then in the U.S., historically, they've been viewed slightly distinctly, and now we're starting to blend more together. And agroforestry refers to a land use management system or a set of practices or technologies, and the focus is very much on production, but also balancing environmental benefits, whereas permaculture can be described as a philosophy, lifestyle, or set of design principles and ethics. Both are based on whole system design concepts. Both are agroecological in nature. So another question of mine for the research was to better understand how these perspectives showed up in the design and management of community food forests and how they might both be able to contribute information in the future to improve the design and management. What I found was mostly it's coming from the permaculture perspective, and agroforestry was being viewed more as a system that needs more education to understand how to implement, as well as larger spaces to implement and have a production focus. So these systems are very much a part of urban agroforestry, and they're showing that agroforestry can happen on a much smaller scale in urban areas, whereas in the U.S. it's most often been promoted for farmscapes. Some of my research criteria to look at these systems was that they had to be open to the public, both for installing them and having volunteers involved in installation, management, but also for harvesting. I needed to have at least 3 vegetation layers at the sites to include them in the final research. And I did not have any that were included on academic campuses, although they do exist, and some of those are on my map on the website. They have such a regular influx and outflow of volunteers that it provided a slightly different system, so we didn't use those. In terms of collecting the data, I did individual interviews with people. I also had focus groups where I went over project management phases, which are initiation, planning, establishment, long-term maintenance, and future visions for the projects. We can understand how they developed, and I walked through the sites with leaders and took video tours of unique features and documented them with photographs. I put this slide in here to talk quickly about the 10-year Urban Forestry Action Plan. This was being developed around the same time that I was out doing my research in order to guide the next decade of urban and community forestry work. And there are a number of goals and issues in the plan that correspond with goals of community food forests, or that they can correlate with. So I just wanted to put this in here to sort of like draw attention to some of these goals and the key issues, because as I go through the rest of the slides, which are mostly going to be examples of what these sites look like, then I think that this can be in the forefront of people's mind that they can help with some of these key issues. And goals such as community health and well-being, and expanding public awareness, education, environmental literacy. Here are a couple examples of what sites actually look like in urban areas, and they can be located in a variety of different properties. So up on the top left, this is Weatherby Park Food Forest in Iowa City, which was located within a public park. The one on the right top, the Fargo Food Forest in Portland, Oregon, that was a private lot, which actually used to be a paved parking lot. And so this shows how a paved parking lot that's underutilized in a city can be turned into basically a small urban park. And the Mesa Harmony Garden on the lower left is located on a religious institution's property, and the Beacon Food Forest on the lower right is on a public property as well. Here's a case example of Rama Edible Forest Nat Garden in Syracuse, New York. And one of the reasons I put this particular example in is to show how it can be linked with health and well-being. The little building on the lower right is a free health clinic located in an area that's known for having higher crime and a lot of poverty, unfortunately. And the lot that you can sort of see is a grassy area to the left of that building was transformed into a food forest. So here again is a picture of the food forest. In the top right, you can see the marker is actually on the health clinic and a large lot with some of the pathways between it. And I just showed located in a larger city area where that is. And there's some buildings to the left of that site, and that's actually a school, so it's also close proximity for students to come visit. The site was basically just a mowed lot in 2007. And the lower picture shows that in 2014, after having some design charrettes and having collecting information on what a design for a food forest might look like, the site was transformed over time into a small forested plot that now in 2017 is starting to grow up and fill in and offers not just a area for people to walk in while they're visiting the clinic, but also where they can learn about healthy foods and wild foods and harvest. There's also members that go into the garden and sometimes bring that fruit and into the health clinic to teach people that are showing up about what is offered out there. There's also some annual plots in that as well. In Pasadena, California, this was on a religious institution property again. They were getting fined for water usage during drought years, and so they worked with a local permaculture group to transition this ground into a more sustainable landscape, as you can see in the lower left photo in 2014. So a lot of native species were used in this. And just looking at these photos, in the upper right corner, there's a patio there that was designed to collect some rainwater and put it out to the edges. So trees were located around the edges of that patio because they would require some more of the water than some of the lower growing plants like sages. So you can design different mechanisms into these sites to work with water harvesting as well. And there was also some annual beds located within that forested area that older members of the congregation could come and also garden there and make it easier for them to access those growing beds. In Portland, Oregon, this is the Fargo Food Forest that I showed earlier, used to be a paved parking lot. This was the parking lot in 2007, and there was a large event held to get everybody excited about this transformation of the parking lot. Over 100 people showed up during an all-day event to break up all the pavement, remove it, and start working on the topsoil. The owner of the lot then spent about a year with a few core members building up the forest floor and creating some swales, mounds of soil, sort of rehabilitating the soil, and also planning in stormwater management. So there is water collection off the roofs of those buildings that go into this lot now. And again, their paths were planned so that they can collect that water in underground areas. Here's another example in San Francisco of a lot that was previously just a vacant lot in a neighborhood on a very hilly terrain, as you can see. And over time, this was transformed with swales and on the contour of the slope with plants, with a lot of perennial plants located along the edges. There are some annual plants integrated as well. So you can see the young forest ecosystem starting to take shape here. And this is what it looked like in 2014 when I visited the site. And this is a picture of like walking one of the pathways that if viewed from above looks like an actual contour swaled area, but also is a manicured clear mulch pathway for people to be invited into the site. And members that are still part of the volunteer group that come in and do new projects on the site, building that community aspect. Here's another example at Roger Williams Park. This is in Providence, Rhode Island. This is a joint project between University of Rhode Island Outreach Center and Master Gardeners. It's located along the water edge, which to me demonstrates that these can also be used as riparian buffers, which is very much an agroforestry type of practice. The design is on the right-hand side, and you can see on the left what that actually looks like once implemented on the ground. And also to the left of this photo, which looks a little bit more round, is a community garden. This area that I have circled is what we're focusing on. You can see that it's sort of a little peninsula within this water system. And it was completely, well, for the most part, bare in 2010 with some trees along it and bushes. But now it has much more built up buffer zone around that edge before the water, before the community garden and the water. Standing down in the site, you can see that the community food forest is starting to fill in and create sort of a transition from just like open area into those few forested trees along the edge. And you can also build in habitat for these food forests. So not only are they providing an area for people to come together over food, collaboratively growing and producing and harvesting, but there's definitely a component for increasing habitat. Many of the food forests that I visited were installing bee nests like this one here for native bees. But this particular site to me shows that it's really reproducing sort of a habitat ecosystem, because where those cones are, they found nesting turtles at the site and decided to protect them. This is the community capital framework, and I mentioned that I really focus on the social dimension. So this was the framework that I looked at, which has 7 different forms of capital: social, cultural, human, natural, political, built, and financial. And I looked at how these were present at sites, whether or not they were present. And when I went through the different management phases during the focus groups, did I see some of these capitals surface at other times? And social capital for sure was coming up throughout the entire management process, but very much in order to get these sites going. Social capital and the community aspect is really strong, and that's why I do believe that these sites are a variation or a different type of site than just saying a broader term of urban food forestry in general. So I put up a few different examples of photos from sites to show, what were sort of indicators to me that when these different capitals were showing up. And sometimes an example of the built capital is at the Beacon Food Forest next to the built part there is a processing center and an area where the community can gather. There are signs there where they can note different information to each other. And that particular type of capital can help build the social capital because it's giving people a gathering space. And so another part of understanding how these capitals are present in a community food forest is how they start to build on each other. And so I wanted to end my portion of the talk by showing an example that I recently found out about of how these capitals really can start to build on each other at one of these sites and create and increase these type of assets and resources in the community. So this is the Richmond Greenway Edible Forest Project in Richmond, California. And this greenway was, for the most part, very low-growing grass, as you can see in the front of this photo. And the part that I circled is the community food forest in the back, and this was funded by the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Southwest Research Station and multiple other partners, including Urban Tilth, which is the managing organization. This is what the food forest looked like walking through it. And it was located next to a neighborhood. You can see some of the buildings in the back that were invited in to do a lot of harvesting. They would have like pie baking contests. They would invite the children in to help water the site with water guns and make like little exciting activities to include people in this area. It became extremely popular as a place for people to recreate. They also had a summer program for youth where they would be paid to come help steward the site and make sure that everything was irrigated. And over time, what this led to in the last few years is people advocating this was a community-led project. In the upper right picture, you can see where the food forest was located. And people advocated to turn this entire area of the Greenway into a community park that would have a lot of different aspects to it as far as like garden beds. It would have a stage for having local concerts. And the food forest would be increased in size and would also provide an area for people to sit during in the shade. So to me, this is a great example of how a community food forest can bring attention to an underutilized space in a community, really increases people's interest in how to be civically engaged in both planning our urban landscape, but also increasing their environmental resources. And so they had the grand opening last year, I believe, and this park is a great example of how those assets can build in a community. So to wrap things up, there is a lot more research coming out, and I've included this slide so in case people want to do their own looking into some of what is starting to come out. There's criteria and indicators for monitoring food forestry that are combined with indicators in ecological restoration research. And there's also been some studies out on how food forests can increase environmental literacy for youth as well. So this is just a slide showing some of the different research in case people want to look into that more. And then some future directions where I think research is needed is understanding how these sites might be able to be used for bioretention areas and stormwater management, but also what type of effects those will have and what needs to be considered in the design and the harvesting of fruit from those locations. Also, they're providing sort of a source of novel ecosystems, and how can that be combined with urban conservation. But of course, and this is where Anne can speak to this more, is climate-smart urban green infrastructure that has multiple functions, but is designed with fire prevention and drought resistance and native species in mind. So with that, I'll wrap up my section. Thank you very much.